Hey everyone, welcome back to Coded Row. In this video, I'm going to be starting a new series called Creating Your First Game in Unreal Engine, and this is catered towards a beginner audience. I've gotten a lot of Patreon requests about this and some requests via Discord, and let's go ahead and get started. So the first thing you're going to want to do is head over to unrealengine.com and you'll click on Get Unreal, and then you can download the launcher. Make sure you make an account before doing this because you will have to log in to use the Epic Games launcher, and it is free to make. Once that's extracted and launched, you'll see a launcher just like this. And on the left, you'll see Store, Library, and Unreal Engine. And we'll go ahead and click on Unreal Engine. And now you'll see these top buttons that say New, Samples, Marketplace, Library, and so on. And we're going to go ahead and click on Library. It'll probably be all empty for you. So under my projects, I have a ton of templates and a ton of stuff in my vault, which are just Marketplace items. And up here, you'll see under engine versions that the latest one at the time of making this tutorial is 5.4.2. So in order to download this, you're just going to click this plus sign next to engine version, and then you will look for 5.4.2, and then you can hit install to download it. And once that's done, we're going to go ahead and click launch to launch the project. And if it's your first time launching, initialization might take a little bit. And now in my new Unreal project browser, I am greeted by all my recent projects that I have here. Games, film, video, architecture, automotive, simulation, and so on. We're going to go ahead and click games. And for this tutorial, we're going to be making a little target shooter where you use the first person template, as it states here, to create a small FPS where you go around the sample map, hit 10 targets, and then you win the game and you can restart it. So I'll go ahead and click first person. And for the project defaults, I'm going to click blueprint. So for project name, I'm just going to call this something like tutorial 10 targets. And the project location can really be wherever you want. And for this one, I'm just setting it into my Unreal projects default. And then you'll hit create to launch the project. And now once that's launched, you'll be greeted into a map that looks like this. You can hold right click to move around and WASD to move as if it is a video game. And you can also hold Q to go down, E to go up, and use the mouse wheel to go in and out. And if, let's say, you stray off the map really far, in your outliner on the right, you can just click on one of these cubes or one of these, anything that's really in the map, and hit F to get an overview of it, and it'll zoom you right to it. If you were to click something like the sky sphere and click F, you'll see the entire world, and it will be a little hard to get back. So I just recommend clicking on one of the cubes, clicking F, and it will just zoom you in back to your map. And now I want to hide my toolbar at the bottom here. So I'm just going to hit Shift F11 in order to hide that. And now let's go ahead and just test this sample project out. So you can do it by hitting the play button, or as you hover over it, it'll show you the shortcut Alt P. And one thing I like to do is I like to hit F11 on my keyboard while this is active, just so it'll full screen it and kind of play it like a game. And now what's going to happen is your character will be able to pick up this gun, and you can actually shoot these cubes around, and you'll see it adds some impulses. It's really loud, so be careful. And yeah, you'll see these little projectile balls just kind of roam around, bounce around, and then it'll destroy after a little bit of time. So now let's get on to actually making our game. Hold Control and Space to open your content drawer, or you can click on this content drawer button on the bottom left, and then you can click Dock and Layout. And now the first thing I'm going to do is create a folder by right-clicking into my content browser and selecting New Folder. And I'm just going to call this Target. Now double click to go into this folder, and I'm going to right click again and while I'm in this folder and create a new blueprint class. And we're going to create an actor. So an actor is an object that can be placed or spawned in the world, and this will act as our targets that we can hit. It will destroy on the hit, and it will also increase our score by 1 each time we land an attack or land our bullet on the target. So I'm just going to name this BP for blueprint underscore target. So the reason why we use underscore is because you can't add spaces into your names. They just have to be a sequence of characters. The underscore acts as a space. I'm going to double click to open the blueprint editor. So you'll see that it opened in its own window. And in order to drag it into our main window, I'm just going to hold left click on this, just like a web browser, and just drag it next to my first person map. So as you open your blueprint editor, you'll be greeted with a viewport, a components tab, my blueprints on the bottom left, and details on the right. So what I want to do is create something that looks like a target and that will be noticeable by the player so they'll know what to hit. So under components, I'm going to click add, and I will add a sphere. And now you'll see it is just a white sphere. And in this case, I'm going to hit R while you see this gizmo, and I'm actually going to scale this down on the Y axis. just to give it a little flat, rounded look. You don't have to, you can leave these as perfect spheres, and I'll just hit compile and save. And now what I want to do is click add again, and I'm going to be adding a box collision. And this box collision will be able to tell our projectile that we impacted on the static mesh. So for the box collision, I'm just going to get a little bit in front of this and just line it up with my mesh by playing with this gizmo. And you can use your R key in order to scale this on all sides. So I will scale it just to fit this sphere inside. And even if you miss a little bit, that's totally fine. And I'll hit compile and save. And now in the viewport, you'll see 3 windows by default. It'll say construction script and event graph and viewport. So what I'm going to do next is go over to my event graph. And currently you'll see these disabled nodes by default, which is begin play, actor begin overlap, and event tick. We can highlight over all of these and just hit the delete key to get rid of them from our event graph. And I'll hit compile and save. And now we need to add an event that's going to detect our on-hit collision. And that's exactly why we created that box collision. So I'm going to click on this and you'll see the details of this appear on the right side of the screen. So now in the details on the right, I'm going to scroll all the way to the bottom and there's going to be a section called events. And these events are already predefined by Unreal Engine. So as box is selected, I'm going to just click on this plus sign next to on component hit. So when I hit this plus sign, it's going to add this into my event graph and I'm going to be able to connect these pins and make a function and connect a bunch of functions in order to execute what I want. So in this case, we're going to test this out by just connecting this to something called destroy actor. Whenever this is hit by my bullet, for example, it will just destroy the actor. And if I were to hit compile and save, go back to my first person map and just drag this out, and I'll just place this somewhere over here in the middle, and I'll hit play to get started. And now I'll just hover over this gun to pick it up, shoot it, and you'll see that it destroys the actor and the actor disappears. So I'll hit escape to cancel this and go back to my BP target. And now we're going to do a few things. First, I don't want my target to be a giant white ball. I actually want to make it red. So I'm going to go back to my first person map, and in my target folder, I'm going to right click, and over here you'll see this called material. So I'll just call this m_target for material_target and click enter. And now I'll double click to open this up. And on the right, you'll see a node that is the output of the M target or of our material. And on this view, you'll be able to see what it looks like right now. So I can go ahead and right click. And what I want to do is search for a constant 3 vector, which is basically going to allow me to select my RGB. And I can click on this black square to open this color picker up, and I'll select it to a red hue. And even though I click OK here, you'll see this red in this preview, but it's not actually showing to my material. And that's because I need to connect this output pin into the base color. And now I'll hit Control Save to apply this to the material. And you can play around with a few things like metallic, specular, roughness, and so on. And you can even make it glow by selecting an emissive color. And all I'm going to do is go back to my BP target, click on this sphere, and I want to apply this material by scrolling all the way up in the details panel, and under this materials tab, you'll see an element 0, and I'm just going to change this to my m_target. And now you'll see that the color I applied over here will affect all my targets, BP targets, that are using this material. So I'll go ahead and click compile and save. And now if I go over back to my first person map, you'll see it applied in my world. So it's going to reflect right away. And now in my character, I need to set up a scoring system. Go to Window and make sure World Settings is checked. I'll open this dropdown called Selected Game Mode, which is going to show us our default pawn class, HUD, player controller class, and so on. I'm going to click on this folder with a magnifying glass next to BP first person character in order to find my character. And I'm going to double click to open this up. And you'll see that the character already comes with quite a few components, events, and so on. And if you look through the event graph, you'll see that the camera input and movement input is already set up, and you already have your jump. So in order for us to start creating a score, we need to store it in something like an integer, which is just a placeholder for a number with no decimal values. So down here on the bottom left, next to variables, I'm going to click on this plus sign and create something called score. And you'll see that by default it's set to Boolean, but I'm just going to click on this drop down and just select integer. And now I want to create a function called getScore. And what this is going to do is give us a return value of our score because we're going to need to show it on a UI. Or in this case, it's going to be called a widget blueprint. So I'm just going to drag this out and look for a return node. So while I have return or getScore selected, I'm just going to click on this output because output will be coming from our return node and input will be shown under getScore. So I'm just going to click on this plus sign, and now you'll see this new param of an integer, but I want to call this score. And I'm just going to plug in this score that we created by dragging it out into our event graph, and I'll be able to get it or set it. And in this case, we're just going to get our score because this is our getter for our variable score. So it means what score already is. And I'll hit compile and save. And I want score to have a default value of 0, and by default it already does that. And you can double check that by clicking on score under variables. And on the right side under details, there's a default value which will only show up after compiling, and score is set to 0, which is exactly what I want. And now back in my event graph, I want to create a blueprint interface that will keep track of my score. So a blueprint interface contains only the declaration of functions and not their implementation. It also allows for communication between blueprints without needing them to know about each other directly. And this helps reduce dependencies and increase modularity in your project. They're also an effective tool for creating modular, maintainable, and efficient blueprints because of how optimized they are. So in order for us to create a blueprint interface, I'm just going to head on over back to my first-person map. And while I'm already in my first-person blueprints folder, I can just create it here. So I'm going to right-click, and under the Create Advanced Asset, while Blueprint is highlighted, you'll see in this little chart, in this little section, that there's a blueprint interface. So I'm just going to type in BPI underscore score interface. And I'll just double click to open this up. And you'll see that by default, it's already telling me to rename this new function. And this is already highlighted to be renamed. So I'm just going to call this increment score and hit enter. And that's all I need from this. I don't need to do anything else for this. So I'll hit compile and save and go back to my first person character. And now up here in this cogwheel, you'll see it say class setting. And I want to implement this interface, this blueprint interface that we created into my first person character. So in order to do that, I'm just going to hit class setting. And over here, there's a button under interfaces that says implemented interfaces. I'm just going to click this add dropdown and look for my BPI underscore score interface. And as soon as I do that, you'll see this interface module pop up. And I can click this dropdown to see where it says increment score. And now I want to set some rules. So in my score, I'm going to double click to have this appear in my event graph. And what I want to do is set my score at the very beginning. So I'm going to drag out score and click set score and just make sure these pins are connected. Now I don't want my score to be 0 at all times. I want it to add 1 every time I hit my target. So I'll drag out score again and called get score. And then I'll drag this out and type in the plus sign in order to add. And for the second interval, since it's always going to add just 1, I can just type in 1 right here, and I can drag this into score. So this is basically telling it that whenever the score is incremented, it increments by score plus 1. And now it sets it as our new score. And now after this is set up, I need a way to tell my game that whenever a target is destroyed, that it will add plus 1 score to my score. And now what I need to do is just tell my target to add plus 1 to my score. So in order to do this, I'm going to drag out this execution pin and look for a branch because we're going to be looking for a condition. And the condition we're looking for is does object implement interface. And in this case, our object will actually be our player controller. So I'll just drag this test object out and call this player controller just like this. And for the interface that we're looking for, this is going to be using that score interface we created called BPI score interface. And if this is true, then it will destroy the actor. But we're not actually adding on to the score just yet. So I'll just create some space. I'll just drag out that destroy actor a bit to the right. And I want to actually call this increment score from the BPI score interface. And in parentheses, you'll see this message sign. And my target will also be my get player character because that is the one that is implementing this interface, just like this. And now hit compile and save. If I were to run this right now, it would actually not work because I accidentally clicked get player controller when it's supposed to be get player character. And now if I were to go ahead and run this, compile, save, and run this, pretty much the same thing will be happening where when I shoot these targets, they'll be destroyed on hit. And now in our first person character, let's do a little bit of debugging. So I'm just going to right click under the increment score and look for a debug key. And in this case, I'm going to use F on my keyboard. And when pressed, I want it to print a string. And in the in string, I'm just going to connect the pin from the score into the in string. So I'll hit compile and save. And now when I go over back to my first person map and hit play, on the top left, if I hit F, you'll see that by default it is 0 because we don't have any score yet. And if I shoot one of these and click F again, it's up to 1. And now if I click again, after shooting the second one, I have a score of 2. But let's make the UI a little prettier and implement some HUDs for this. So in order to do that, I am just going to go in my folder, I'm going to right click and under blueprint, under user interface, I'm going to select this widget blueprint and I'll click on this user widget. This is going to be called WBP, which stands for widget blueprint underscore score. So I'll call it WBP underscore score and double click to open this up. Now it may look a little intimidating, but this is basically just your design. And we'll pass some functionality in order for the HUD to update every time something happens. And in this case, it's going to update every time we score. So the first thing I'm going to do is on the left in palette, I'm going to look for a canvas panel, drag this over this WBP score widget. And now you'll see our screen. So this represents our entirety of the screen. And in this canvas panel, I want to add some text. So I'll just search for text and just drag it into the canvas panel. And make sure you're using text as well, just because rich text and some other text boxes have different functionalities from a regular text. So I'm going to click on this text block over here. And on the right, you'll see this option where I can set it as a variable. So I'll hit that check mark and I'm actually going to change this text name or the variable name to score text. And I'll hit compile and save. But I don't want it to be just displayed on the left. I actually kind of want to center it a bit. So while this is selected, I'm going to click on the drop down of my anchors and I'll select this one, which will show on the middle top. But you'll see that the text block actually didn't move over, and that's because the position X didn't move at all. So I'll just click on this reset button in order to reset the property to the default, which now it's set to 0. It's actually not perfectly centered. So in order to do that, I am just going to look for the alignment and do 0.5, which stands for 50% on my X and 50% on my Y to put it perfectly. But it's going to be cut off because as you can see, it's over the line a bit. So a few things that I want to do is I'm actually going to size the content to this so it'll know exactly how big my content is, and I want to move it down a bit. So in order to move it down, I am just going to position the Y to something like negative to something like 150 so that it shows nicely in the center a little bit on the upper side of my screen. And I'll hit compile and save. And now on the top right, you'll see it says 2 buttons, which is Designer, which is what we're in currently, and Graph. Now go ahead and click Graph in order to enter our graph. And this is basically our functionality in order to display our score. So I'm going to erase the event pre-construct and the event tick. Back in our designer, you'll see that our score text, since we click this is variable option, it is now in the graph as a variable here. In my event construct, I will actually want to cast this to my first person character. Usually casting is a bad habit, but in the case of an event construct, it's only called once during a special event, and we'll make sure that it's very optimized. So I'm going to drag this out and cast to our BP first person character by clicking on this. And I'll drag out the object and get owning player pawn. Now what I want to do is actually bind this to an event so that it'll update the score each time. But we don't have anything telling our WBP score. This is where you get the score from, and this is what the current score is. So back in I'll hit compile and save, and back in my first person character, I want to create this event dispatcher. And I'll call this something like update score. And now while update score is selected, in the details, I'm going to add an input to this called score text. So I'll click on this plus sign to add a new parameter, and I'll just call this score text and set it to integer. And now I'm going to drag this event dispatcher into our graph right next to where it says set score and hit call. So what I want to do is set our score to the call update score and set the integer of the score to score text. And now I'll hit compile and save. And back in my WBP score widget, I can now call this event dispatcher. I can now bind this event to our update score. So I'll click bind event update score. So bind event to update score. And my target will be as BP first person character. And it's grabbing this event dispatcher from my first person character. And now we need to call it an event in order to set the text of our score. So in this case, I'm going to create a custom event called update score. And we want to set the text of our score text. So I'm going to drag the score text variable that we created out into the graph and call get score text. And now when I drag this pin out to place a new node, I'm going to add the set text, and in parentheses, it'll say text. And I'll drag the execution pin from update score into our execution pin of set text. And I could just connect the score text into the in text, but I actually want to pretty up a little bit. I just want to pretty this up a little bit just to make it look a bit more friendly. So I'm going to drag out this in text part and look for a format text. And now I'm just going to pin this score text into it really quick, just to click add pin once, just so you have this 0. And now I'll highlight over it and delete it. And what I want to do is format the text. So I'm going to type in score and then colon, and now we need to get the actual number, which is over here in our score text. And I'm going to drag out my score text and place it into this 0. And now in format, I'm going to type in score, colon, and then in curly brackets, I'm going to type in this 0 because that represents the variable of this 0. So it'll grab our score text. And then I want to do /10 because our higher score will be 10 in order to bring us our you win screen. So I'll hit compile and save. And now I need to add it to my character. So in order to show this WBP score onto my character, I'm going to head back over to my BP first person character. And now I'm going to scroll up to the top and I'm going to right click here and add an event begin play because I want it to take place when the game starts. When the game starts or when we begin play, I want to create a widget. And I'll highlight over these and I click Q on the keyboard in order to just align these lines. And for the class, I'm going to call this WBP score we created. So I'll type in WBP score. And just because it's created doesn't mean it's actually added to the viewport. So you want to drag out this execution pin and click add to viewport. And the return value, which is going to be this class, is going to be what's added to our viewport. So I'll just connect these pins here. Now when I hit compile and save, you're going to see that when I click play, it says text block. But when I pick up my gun and shoot, it'll update to score 1/10. But what I can do here is set the default text for our text block by going back over to our WBP score, going to designer, making sure text block is active. And over here where it says text is text block, I'll just type in score colon 0/10, just like this. And I'll hit compile and save. So now when I start the game, it'll say score 0 out of 10. And it will update each time I shoot these little targets. And since that's working, I can go back to my BP first person character, scroll all the way down and delete this debug. So now I don't need to print string because I actually see my score updating. Now in my first person character, I want to make sure that there is a win condition. So I'm going to drag out this score again and call in a greater than equal than sign. So this operator will allow us to tell that if we are greater than equal to this number, then we can drag out this Boolean condition in order to proceed and do something else. So I'll just set this to 10 because I want it to say if it's greater than equal to 10, then I'm going to drag this out and call a branch. And I'm just going to place this right after the call update score dispatcher that we created and connect this pin. So this will say if we are greater than equal to 10 points, then we need to call some sort of win screen that says you win. So now we need to create another widget blueprint that is going to be our winning game. That will be our win screen. So I'll go back to my first person map, right click, user interface, and create another widget blueprint. And I'll just select user widget and call this WBP underscore win game. Now double click to open this. There are a few things that I need to do. So first I'll add my canvas panel and drag this over my WBP game. For this one, I just want to add something that says you win and a button that says we can restart to play again. So I'll add some text right in the middle of my screen and drag the text over the canvas panel. And I'll just call this the you win text. And I want to center this and I'll probably raise it up a bit. Or actually I'll just center this onto the screen. So I'll click this drop down on anchors and then click this middle one. And then I want to reset the position X and Y value by hitting these arrows. And I want to align it to 50% of the screen on my X and Y just to perfectly center it. And I also want to select this size to content, so I don't need to worry about adjusting this text to a T because it's just going to say you win with an exclamation mark. And I'm going to go down to font, change the font from Roboto to something like, actually Roboto is just fine. And I'm going to increase the size to, let's say 200. And I can select light, bold italics, and I'll just leave it as bold italics. And I can also increase the letter spacing. And I'll just play around with this a little bit and leave it like that. So I'll go ahead and hit compile and save. But now I need to make sure there's a way to actually restart the game. So what I need to do is I'm going to go ahead and add a button right into our canvas panel. In this button, I'm going to call this restart and make sure that the is variable is checked. And now I just want to pretty up this button and make it look nice. So I'm going to go over to this anchor and select the middle one. And I'm going to reset the default values by selecting these arrows on the side, and you'll see that it's right in the middle. And for the size X, I'll do something like, I'll just set it to something like 300. And then for the size Y, I'll set it to something like 50. And for the alignment, I'll type in 0.5 for the X and Y just to center it up. But I want to make sure that it's a bit lower. So for the alignment, I'm actually just going to type in -3 to put it down here under the you win. And now I want to play around with the style a bit because the gray is kind of boring and bland. So while normal is dropped down, I'm going to set the tint to something like red, just so it's normally red. And whenever it's hovered, I'm just going to click on this drop down and select something like a blue. And I'll just leave it at that. But what I also want to do is tell the user what this button does. So I'm just going to add another text and actually drag this right into the restart button. And I'm just going to type in restart while this is selected, just to let the user know that clicking this will restart the game. And now I'll go ahead and click compile and save and head to the graph. So I want to make sure that this restart button that we have will actually restart the game. So while this variable is highlighted, I want to do an on clicked and hit this plus button. And basically when you click the restart button, it's going to get the current level name and it will open level by name. And I'm just going to connect this return value to the level name so that it'll just reopen the level in order to restart it. And I'll hit compile and save. But I need a way to tell it to show up once I actually reach 10 points. So back in my first person character, there are a few things that I need to do. So after we hit 10 points, what I want to do is actually remove all the widgets. And what this means is that it's going to get rid of that score 0/10, or in this case 10 out of 10 from my screen, because we don't really need to tell the player that anymore and they already know that they won. And next, what I'm going to do is create a WBP or create a widget. And the widget that it's going to create this time is going to be the WBP win game. And we're just going to add this to the viewport. And I'll make sure that the return value is selected to target. And I'll hit compile. And let's actually test this out by placing all 10 targets next to each other. So I'm just going to select one of these targets, hold Control and click D to duplicate, and just put them next to each other. And I'll just overlap them just so it's easier to land. And now I'll test this out by destroying 10 of these and getting 10 points. So you'll see that it adds up to 10 and the you win screen comes up. But there's another problem. My character can keep playing and I actually can't even click the restart because my cursor doesn't show up. So let's go ahead and fix that. I'll click escape, click F11 to minimize the screen a bit, and go back to my BP first person character. And after this viewport, after the add to viewport function takes off, which shows our win game, I want to disable movement. And it's going to call it from our character movement component that's already made for us in this sample template of our first person shooter template. And I'm going to look for a get player controller. And with this player controller, I'm going to look for a return value. For the return value, I'm going to drag it out and look for a node called show mouse cursor. And I want to get the setter to set our mouse cursor. And I'll drag these pins and make sure that this is checked because I always want this to be true after we disable our movement and show the win game widget blueprint. So now when I go back to my game and hit play, I'll hit F11 to maximize it, grab the gun, and when I shoot 10 of these, it'll say you win, and I can click restart. So at least I can click it, but my character is still moving. So let's go ahead and fix that. So in order to fix that, I'm just going to actually get rid of this disable movement and the character movement component that it's connected to as a target, drag this out and look for disable input. And this will stop any input that I'm allowed to do via my character. And make sure these pins are connected and the player controller will just get connected to a get player controller, just like this. And I'll hit compile and save, go back to my first person map, maximize the screen, click play, and I'll grab the gun and just shoot 10 of these. And now you'll see that I can't move around, I can't move my camera, I can't even shoot. The only thing I can do is click restart because I'm forced to play this game on an endless loop. And in order to make it challenging, you can go ahead and just spread your targets around the map and go ahead and full screen and hit play. And just like that, you've created your first game in Unreal Engine 5. Thanks so much for sticking around till the end. We just created a fun and engaging game using Unreal Engine 5 that's perfect for beginners. We learned how to create a scoring system, set up some widget blueprints or UI that pretty much shows us our score and a win screen and determine how the player wins the game. I hope you enjoyed building this game as much as I did. If you found this tutorial helpful, please give it a thumbs up and share it with your friends who might be interested in learning game development. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel Coded Row for more exciting tutorials on Unreal Engine 5, programming, and much more. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. If you have any questions or need further assistance, feel free to leave a comment below or join our Discord community where we discuss all things coding and game development. The link to join is in the description below, along with my Patreon if you wish to support the channel. If you have another beginner tutorial that you want me to make, just remember that I will be creating a ton of create your first games in Unreal Engine, so feel free to stick around if you wish to create more beginner content. Thanks for watching and supporting my channel, and I'll see you in the next video. Happy coding!